A new companion, a distant planet, a little bit of mystery and some robots firing guns. Today sees the release of the first episode of a new season of Doctor Who, The Robot Revolution. But was this episode a tour de force? How did it stand up against Space Babies? Should it give us hope for the series to come, or should we fear what's ahead? All of this and more I'll discuss in this latest video, but please do be aware that it contains spoilers, so if you haven't seen this episode yet, then you might want to check it out first. If you have and you're ready to go, then please join me as we take a step beyond the sofa. I've got my wrong t-shirt on today. I usually wear a grey t-shirt to do these. This is a blue t-shirt, and whilst it doesn't matter to most people, it matters to me. Just in my head. Now look, I've got to confess, I've not been interested in most of the announcements about this series of Doctor Who. I'm not sure that I'm particularly ambivalent as such, but there seems to be so many other more interesting things happening at the moment. Not just in television, but lots of different forms of media. And the work that I'm doing at the moment, I'm really just interested in. And, you know, I've just sat and watched the fan production of The Wheel in Space, and I absolutely loved it. It was excellent. That's been pushing me forward as a fan much more than any announcement about season 2. I've also tried to stay away from the rumours and the speculation and any leaks that might have been around. So I don't have any kind of preconceptions going into this. All I had was my feeling after watching the last season and the Christmas special. And honestly, I wasn't really sure what I'd be in for. Last season was a bit of a hodgepodge of different styles and different story structures. And I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I think most of the episodes from last season worked very well. But coming into season 2, it did feel that the whole thing was a little bit more disjointed, and I wasn't quite sure what I should be looking for. And perhaps it's this disconnect that's meant that my excitement for the season has been really quite low. It feels like it's something that I'm going to watch, but it's not really at the front of my mind. For a long time Doctor Who fan, that does kind of make me a bit worried about where we're going here. But within the first few minutes, I knew where we were. And in some respect, I knew where we were because this retread themes that we've had before. It's very much like the start of Smith and Jones. And that's not always a bad thing. There's been discussions about Russell T Davies repeating all of his greatest hits with Shoot His Doctor, but there's only a certain amount of things that you can do that will establish a character or allow people to run into one another. So the opening of this, I thought, was quite interesting. I like a lot of the ideas around the certificate, the idea that the certificate actually has some sort of real world consequence. And whilst the first 3 minutes of the episode are a little bit paint by numbers, by the time Belinda is taken into the spaceship and we're whisked away into the universe, things start to get a little bit more interesting. We have a nice setup for something which will be called back later on. We have a nice moment from Mrs. Flood.
You won't see me.
And we see the TARDIS so that we know the Doctor is on the way as well. And I've got to say, some of the internal logic of this story actually works really well here. I like the use of the certificate. I like that the story is using time and time travel without it feeling like it's just a convenient explanation for plot elements, because it's not. It's very much woven into the story itself.
That's complicated things.
We also have a nice idea about the robots only being able to understand 8 words in 9. All of that stuff I quite liked. And then the fighting happens and the running happens and things start to go downhill a little bit. I'm not entirely convinced about the internal logic of the episode from this point forward. Belinda is told that she is responsible for what's happening with the robots. There is no way that Belinda is responsible, and her decision to sacrifice herself through some sort of sense of duty, it felt like a device to move the plot forward rather than a character thing. And when you're writing advertising copy, you're told about pain points and that you have to understand your client's pain points in order to help motivate them. What we see here is the consequence of that motivation without the preceding pain points. A few people shouting at her that it's all her fault. Well, that doesn't fit with what we know about the character. So this sacrifice isn't a redeeming moment. It's not a character realizing their flaw who's actually responsible for anything that's happened to them. She does not have the agency in this situation for that to be true. It would have been better if her sacrificing herself would have definitely made the problems go away, but it wouldn't. Again, that's the sort of thing that would need to be set up much earlier in the episode. And perhaps that's the problem. A lot of this episode wants to rely on some sort of big reveal. So we have the big reveal of the bad guy at the end and the reveal of what he was like and why they broke up. And that just didn't work for me at all. Partly because I never thought that the two of them were actually a couple to begin with. It just didn't read like that from the first scene. I thought he was kind of awkward and a bit of a mess, and I thought that Belinda at that point didn't really seem into him at all. So when the doctor said about them breaking up, I hadn't even considered that they might have been a couple in the first place. And this leads to what can only be described as a fairly cookie-cutter, two-dimensional villain. Now, there have been villains in the past whose main motivation is spurned love. It's actually a pretty fine motivational reason for a character to become a villain, but that's not really what we're seeing here. Sure, Belinda turns him down, but we then see a character who's just kind of happy playing computer games. He then gets picked up by robots and told that he's essentially playing a real-life computer game, and suddenly, as soon as he sits in the chair, he becomes evil. So none of what we've actually been told about this backs up the whole Planet of the Incels commentary. And it does feel like the lines in that scene exist because they'll annoy the right people rather than to advance the plot or explain a character. It doesn't even serve as a good shorthand to understand his character, because his character's motivations are all over the place. It's like somebody had the idea of an archetype without really placing any emotional weight into what it would mean if it was actually part of his character. When I started writing short stories, back when I was a jobbing writer, one of the things that an editor told me was that every single word in your story, every line, every concept, everything should serve the story. And that means that it should advance the plot. It should explain motivation, or it should reveal character. But that's not happening here. In this instance, the commentary has moved from archetype, which is something that could be used in order to gain a sort of shorthand to understanding a character, to a stereotype, which is often inaccurate or hyperbolic.
I am supreme.
It's lazy writing, and it wouldn't have taken a lot to actually give a bit of motivation to the character, which goes beyond, well, he was always a wrong-un.
Destroy him!
But whilst I find myself frustrated with some of the writing of this episode, there are things in there that I did like. Chief amongst them was Belinda. I think she is a great character, and I love the new dynamic between her and the Doctor. The acting in this was really great. I like that we have an explanation of the actor appearing in Boom without it being some sort of mystery, although there was clearly a hint that that could be coming up, which, after what happened with Ruby, kind of felt, well, it filled me with a bit of dread anyway. I thought that, no, is it Varda? You're going to have to forgive me with these pronunciations because I've literally heard this a couple of times and that's it. And it will take me a while for these things to sink in. Look, I thought she was excellent. I love the moment with the robots where she's talking to Mrs. Flood. I love the way that she handles the conflict between her and the Doctor from an acting point of view. I mean, not from anything else. And there's clearly some chemistry there, which I'm hoping is going to lead to a really interesting dynamic TARDIS team when Ruby is also a part of them as well. And despite what I've said about the writing, this was a much better opener than Space Babies. But I'll forgive it some transgressions because it has a lot to do with the fact that you're setting up a character, you're setting up plots and arcs, And if anything, this has cemented in my mind that the running time of these episodes is too short. A lot of the issues here are because it's massive ideas crammed into a really short space of time. And in previous series, those ideas would be spread across episodes or arcs, but there's not the space to do that with an 8-episode run. But imagine that you had 90 minutes of this. You could expand the revolution. You could see what it's like in the trenches. You could have a couple of battles that maybe they win, maybe they lose. You could give the villain a true motivation. You could explore the robots beyond them just being slaves of the machine. And actually, that was a bit of an interesting point because I did feel the AI intelligence was a little bit too much like a Cyberman when I first saw it. But in light of the reveal at the end, it does kind of make sense. A machine merged with a human. But it did strike me as odd when I first heard it, and I did wonder whether or not there'd be some sort of Cybermen in the episode for a few seconds. So where's this leaving me? Well, I do think that this was a lot better than last year's opener. And whilst it has some problems, despite all of the explosions, it's not the most exciting Doctor Who episode out there. There is a lot of setup in this, which does seem to be quite positive in itself. There wasn't enough here to drag me back into being excited about the season. It felt a little bit too cookie cutter, a little bit too children's BBC. And with the kind of Disney money that they've got in this season, it does seem to me that perhaps they should be telling more adult stories. You know, the secret to writing for kids is treating it like writing for adults. And I think that that's something that all of the showrunners and the writers on Doctor Who, they've done quite well for quite some time. But I would like to see that pushed into the production values as well. So we don't get robots that are coloured like lollipops or spaceships that look like they should be out of Button Moon. God, now that really is me showing my age. I also think that this episode is suffering from theme creep, which is something that we might have to discuss more in later videos. It's essentially where you don't have a central theme to a story, but lots of different competing themes that are kind of vying for attention all the time. This ultimately makes disjointed stories and ones that aren't always satisfying. But I'm going to park that there because it could be very situational based purely on this episode. And I'd like to see how the rest of the series plays out before seeing if that's a major problem. I have to say, I am intrigued by Lux next week. I might actually start to look forward to that one over the course of a week. We'll have to see. But I'm hoping that this season will push me back into being excited for the show. You know, I was excited for last year for virtually every episode, and I'd like to feel that again. And that's what I think. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below, and do join me next week when we'll be taking another step into the world of Doctor Who with Lux. It's going to be an interesting episode. It's something that I think Doctor Who could have done before, but perhaps didn't have the budget for it. Let's see where it takes us as we go on another journey beyond the sofa.